Hello and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will begin our reading of the first Miss Reed book about Fairacre, Village School. Chapter 1, Early Morning. The first day of term has a flavor that is all its own, a whiff of lazy days behind and a foretaste of the busy future. The essential thing for a village schoolmistress on such a day is to get up early. I told myself this on a fine September morning, 10 minutes after switching off the alarm clock. The sun streamed into the bedroom, sparkling little rainbows from the mirror's edge, and outside the rooks called noisily from the tops of the elm trees in the churchyard. From their high lookout, the rooks had a view of the whole village of Fairacre clustered below them, the village which had been my home now for 5 years. I had enjoyed those 5 years, the children, the little school, the pleasure of running my own schoolhouse and of taking a part in village life. True, at first I had had to walk as warily as Agag. Many a slip of the tongue caused me even now to go hot and cold at the mere memory. But at last I believed I was accepted, if not as a proper native, at least as Miss Reed up the school, and not as that new woman pushing herself forward. I wondered if the rooks, whose clamor was increasing with the warmth of the sun, could see as far as Tyler's Row at the end of the village. Here lived Jimmy Waits and Joseph Coggs, 2 little boys who were to enter school today. Another new child was also coming, and this thought prodded me finally out of bed and down the narrow stairs. I filled the kettle from the pump at the sink and switched it on. The new school year had begun. Tyler's Row consists of 4 thatched cottages, and very pretty they look. Visitors always exclaim when they see them, sighing ecstatically and saying how much they would like to live there. As a realist, I am always constrained to point out the disadvantages that lurk behind the honeysuckle. The thatch is in a bad way, and though no rain has yet dripped through into the dark bedrooms below, it most certainly will before long. There is no doubt about a rat or 2 running along the ridge, as spry as you please, reconnoitering probably for a future home, and the starlings and sparrows find it a perfect resting place. They ought to do something for us, Mrs. Waits told me, but as they, meaning the landlord, is an old soldier living with his sister in the next village on a small pension and the 3 shillings he gets a week from each cottage when he is lucky, it is hardly surprising that the roof is as it is. There is no drainage of any sort and no damp course. The brick floors sweat, and clothes left hanging near a wall produce a splendid crop of Prussian blue mildew in no time. Washing up water, soap suds, and so on are either emptied into a deep hole by the hedge or flung broadcast over the garden. The plants flourish on this treatment, particularly the rows of Madonna lilies, which are the envy of the village. The night cart, now a tanker lorry, elects to call in the heat of the day, usually between 12 and 1 o'clock once a week. The sewerage is carried through the only living room and out into the road for the edification of the school children who are making their way home to dinner, most probably after a hygiene lesson on the importance of cleanliness. In the second cottage, Jimmy Waits was being washed. He stood on a chair by the shallow stone sink, submitting meekly to his mother's ministrations. She had twisted the corner of the face flannel into a formidable radish and was turning it remorselessly round and round inside his left ear. He wore new corduroy trousers, dazzling braces, and a woolen vest. Hanging on a line which was slung across the front of the mantelpiece was a bright blue and red checked shirt, American style. His mother intended that her Jimmy should do her credit on his first day at school. She was a blonde, lively woman, married to a farm worker as fair as herself. "I always had plenty of spirit," she said once. "Why, even during the war, when I was alone, I kept cheerful." She did, too, from accounts told by her more puritanical neighbors. And certainly none of us is so silly as to ask questions about Kathy, the only dark child of the six, born during her husband's absence in 1944. Kathy, while her brother was being scrubbed, was feeding the hens at the end of the garden. She threw out handfuls of mixed wheat and oats, which she had helped to glean nearly a year ago. This was a treat for the chickens, and they squawked and screeched as they fought for their breakfast. Their noise brought one of the children who lived next door to a gap in the hedge that divided the gardens. Joseph was about 5, of gypsy stock, with eyes as dark and pathetic as a monkey's. Kathy had promised to take him with her and Jimmy on this, his first school morning. This was a great concession on the part of Mrs. Waits, as the raggle-taggle family next door was normally ignored. "Don't you play with them dirty kids," she warned her own children, "or you'll get nurse coming down to the school to look at you special." And this dark threat was enough. But today Kathy looked at Joseph with a critical eye and spoke first. "You ready?" The child nodded in reply. "You don't look it," responded his guardian roundly. "You wants to wash off the jam on your mouth. Got a hanky?" "No," said Joe, bewildered. "Well, you best get one. Bit of rag'll do, but Miss Reed lets off awful if you forgets your hanky. Where's your mum?" "Feedin' baby." "Tell her about the rag," ordered Kathy, "and buck up. Me and Jim's nearly ready." And swinging the empty tin dipper, she skipped back into her house. Meanwhile, the third new child was being prepared. Linda was 8 years old, fat and phlegmatic, and the pride of her fond mother's heart. She was busy buttoning her new red shoes while her mother packed a piece of chocolate for her Levinses at playtime. The Moffats had only lived in Fairacre for 3 weeks, but we had watched their bungalow being built for the last 6 months. "Bathroom and everything," I had been told, "and one of those hatchers to put the dishes through to save your legs. Real lovely." The eagle eye of the village was upon the owners whenever they came over from Caxley, our nearest market town, to see the progress of their house. Mrs. Moffat had been seen measuring the windows for curtains and holding patterns of material against the distempered walls. "Thinks herself someone, you know," I was told later. "Never so much as spoke to me in the road." Perhaps she was shy. "Huh. Or deaf, even." "None so deaf as those that won't hear," was the tart rejoinder. Mrs. Moffat, alas, was already suspected of that heinous village crime known as putting on side. One evening during the holidays, she had brought the child to see me. I was gardening, and they both looked askance at my bare legs and dirty hands. It was obvious that she tended to cosset her rather smug daughter, and that appearances meant a lot to her. But I liked her, and guessed that the child was intelligent and would work well. That her finery would also excite adverse comment among the other children, I also surmised. Mrs. Moffat's aloofness was really only part of her town upbringing, and once she realized the necessity for exchanging greetings with every living soul in the village, no matter how pressing or distracting one's own business, she would soon be accepted by the other women. Linda would come into my class. She would be in the youngest group among those just sent up from the infants' room, where they had spent 3 years under Miss Clare's benign rule. Joseph and Jimmy would naturally go straight into her charge. At 20 to 9, I hung up the tea towel, closed the back door of the schoolhouse, and stepped across the playground to the school. Above me, the rooks still chattered. Far below, they could see, converging upon the school lane, little knots of children from all quarters of the village. Kathy had Jimmy firmly by the hand. Joseph's grimy paw she disdained to hold, and he trailed behind her, his dark eyes apprehensive. Linda Moffat, immaculate in starched pink gingham, walked primly beside her mother, while behind and before, running, dawdling, shouting, or whistling, ran her future schoolfellows. Through the sunny air, another sound challenged the rook's chorus. The school bell began to ring out its morning greeting. Chapter 2. Our School. The school at Fairacre was built in 1880, and as it is a church school, it is strongly ecclesiastical in appearance. The walls are made of local stone, a warm gray in color, reflecting summer light with honeyed mellowness, but appearing dull and dejected when the weather is wet. The roof is high and steeply pitched, and the stubby bell tower thrusts its little Gothic nose skyward, emulating the soaring spire of St. Patrick's, the parish church, which stands next door. The windows are high and narrow with pointed tops. The children were not encouraged in those days to spend their working time in gazing out at the world, and sitting stiffly in the well of the room, wearing sailor suits or stout zephyr and serge frocks, their only view was of the sky, the elm trees, and St. Patrick's spire. Today, their grandchildren and great-grandchildren have exactly the same view, just this lofty glimpse of surrounding loveliness. The building consists of 2 rooms divided by a partition of glass and wood. One room houses the infants, aged 5, 6, and 7 years of age, under Miss Clare's benevolent eye. The other room is my classroom, where the older children of junior age stay until they are 11, when they pass on to a secondary school, either at Caxley, 6 miles away, or in the neighboring village of Beech Green, where the children stay until they are 15. A long lobby runs behind these 2 rooms, the length of the building. It is furnished with pegs for coats, a low stone sink for the children to wash in, and a high new one for washing up the dinner things. An electric copper is a recent acquisition, and very handsome it is, but although we have electricity installed here, there is no water laid on at the school. This is, of course, an appalling problem, for there is no water to drink, and children get horribly thirsty. No water for washing hands, faces, cleansing cuts and grazes, for painting, for mixing paste or watering plants, or filling flower vases, and, of course, no water for lavatories. We overcome this problem in 2 ways. A large galvanized iron tank on wheels is filled with rainwater collected from the roof, and this, when we have skimmed off the leaves and twigs and rescued the occasional frog, serves most of our needs. The electric copper is filled in the morning from this source and switched on after morning playtime to be ready for washing not only the crockery and cutlery after dinner, but also the stone floor of the lobby. I bring 2 buckets of drinking water across the playground from the schoolhouse, where there is an excellent well, but we must do our own heating, so that a venerable black kettle stands on my stove throughout the winter months, purring in a pleasantly domestic fashion, ready for emergencies. The electric kettle in my own kitchen serves us at other times. The building is solid structurally and kept in repair by the church authorities whose property it is. One defect, however, it seems impossible to overcome. A skylight, strategically placed over the headmistress's desk, lets in not only light, but rain. Generations of local builders have clambered over the roof and sworn and sawn and patched and pulled at our skylight, but in vain. The gods have willed otherwise, and year after year Pluvius drops his pennies into a bucket placed below for the purpose, the clanging muffled by a dishcloth folded to fit the bottom. The school stands at right angles to the road and faces across the churchyard to the church. A low, dry stone wall runs along by the road, dividing it from the churchyard, school playground, and the schoolhouse garden. Behind this, the country slopes away, falling slightly at first, then rising in swelling folds up into the full majesty of the downs which sweep across these southern counties for mile upon mile. The air is always bracing, and in the winter the wind is a bitter foe. And that quality of pure light, which is peculiar to downland country, is here very noticeable. The children are hardy, and though quite naturally they take their surroundings for granted, I think that they are aware of the fine views around them. The girls, particularly, are fond of flowers, birds, insects, and all the minutiae of natural life, guarding jealously any rare plant against outsiders' prying eyes, and having a real knowledge of whereabouts and uses of many plants and herbs. The boys like to dismiss such things as girls' stuff, but they too can find the first mushrooms, sloes, or blackberries for their mothers or for me, and most of the birds' nests are known as soon as they are built. Luckily, stealing eggs and rifling nests seems to be on the wane, though occasional culprits are brought to stern judgment at my desk. They suffer, I think, more from the tongues of the girls in the playground in matters like this, for there is no doubt about it that the girls are more sympathetic to living things and pour scorn and contumely on any young male tyrants. In one corner of the small square playground is the inevitable pile of coke for the two slow combustion ovens. These coke piles seem to be a natural feature of all country schools. This is considered by the children a valuable adjunct to playtime activities. A favorite game is to run scrunchily up the pile and then to slither down in gritty exhilaration. Throwing it at each other or at a noisy object such as the rainwater tank is also much enjoyed, hands being wiped perfunctorily down the fronts of jackets or on the seats of trousers before the beginning of writing lessons. All these joys are strictly forbidden, of course, which adds to the fearful delight. Furthest from the wall, by the road at the other side of the playground, grows a clump of elm trees, and their gnarled roots, which add to the hazards of the playground surface, are a favorite place to play. The recesses are rooms, larders, cupboards, or gardens, and the ivy leaves from the wall are used for plates and provisions, and twigs for knives and forks. Sometimes they play shops among the roots, paying each other leaves and bearing away conkers, acorns, or handfuls of gravel as their purchases. I like to hear the change in their voices as they become shopkeepers or customers. They affect a high dictatorial tone of voice which they assume adult status, quite unlike the warm burr of their everyday conversations. The fields lie 2 or 3 feet below the level of the playground, and a scrubby hedge of hazel and hawthorn marks this boundary. The sloping bank down is scored by dozens of little bare paths worn by generations of sturdy boots and corduroy breeches. Altogether, our playground is a good one, full of possibilities for resourceful children and big enough to allow shopkeepers, mothers and fathers, cowboys, and spacemen to carry on their urgent affairs very happily together. On the first morning of term, Miss Clare had already arrived when I walked over at 8:45. Her bicycle, as upright and as ancient as its owner, was propped just inside the lobby door. The school had that indefinable first morning smell compounded of yellow soap, scrubbed floorboards, and black lead. The tortoise stove gleamed like an ebony monster. Even the vent pipe, which soared aloft toward the pitch pine roof, was blackened as far as Mrs. Pringle, the school cleaner, could reach. Clean newspaper covered the fresh hearthstoned surroundings of the stove, which officially remained unlit until October, and the guard, just as glossy, was neatly placed around the edges of the outspread news of the world. My desk had that bare, tidy look that it only wears for an hour or so on this particular morning of the term, and the inkstand, an imposing affair of mahogany and brass, shone in splendor. I wondered as I walked through to Miss Clare's room just how quickly its shelf would remain unencumbered by the chalk, beads, raincoat buttons, paper clips, raffia needles, and drawing pins that were its normal burden. Miss Clare was taking a coat hanger out of her big canvas hold-all. She is very careful of her clothes and is grieved to see the casual way in which the children sling their coats haphazard on the pegs in the lobby. Her own coat is always smoothed methodically over its hanger and hung on the back of the classroom door. The children watch fascinated when she removes her gloves, for she blows into them several times before folding them neatly together. Her sensible felt hat has a shelf to itself inside the needlework cupboard. Miss Clare has taught here for nearly 40 years, with only one break when she nursed her mother through her last illness 12 years ago. She started here as a monitress at the age of 13 and was known officially until recently as a supplementary uncertificated teacher. Her knowledge of local family history is far-reaching and of inestimable value to the teaching of our present pupils. I like to hear the older people talk of her. Always a stickler for tidiness, the butcher told me. The only time I was smacked in the babies' class was when Miss Clare found me kicking another boy's cap round the floor. Miss Clare is of commanding appearance, tall and thin, with beautiful white hair, which is kept in place with an invisible hairnet. Even on the wildest day, when the wind shrieks across the downs, Miss Clare walks around the playground looking immaculate. She is now over 60, and her teaching methods have of late been looked upon by some visiting inspectors with a slightly pitying eye. They are, they say, too formal. The children should have more activity, and the classroom is unnaturally quiet for children of that age. This may be, but for all of that, or perhaps because of that, Miss Clare is a very valuable teacher, for in the first place, the children are happy. They are fond of Miss Clare, and she creates for them an atmosphere of serenity and quiet, which means they can work well and cheerfully, really laying the foundations of elementary knowledge on which I can build so much more quickly when they come into my class. Her home is 2 miles away on the outskirts of the next village of Beech Green. She has lived there ever since she was 6, a solemn little girl in high-buttoned boots and ringlets, in the cottage which her father thatched himself. He was a thatcher by trade, and many of the cottages in the surrounding village are decorated with the ornate crisscrossing and plating which he loved to do. He was much in demand at harvest time for thatching ricks, and Miss Clare often makes rick dollies of straw for the children, like the ones her father used to put on top of the newly thatched stacks. In the corner of the room, John Burton was pulling lustily at the bell rope. He stopped as I came in. 5 minutes rest, I said, then another pull or two to tell the others that it's time to get into lines in the playground. Miss Clare and I exchanged holiday news while she unlocked her desk and took out her new register, carefully shrouded in fresh brown paper. She had covered mine for me, too, at the end of last term, and written in the names of our new classes in her sloping copperplate hand. We should have 40 children altogether this term, 18 in the infants' room and 22 in mine, and though our numbers might seem small compared with the monstrous regiments of 40 or 50 to a class in town schools, the age range, of course, would be a considerable handicap. I should have 5 children in my lowest group who would be nearly 8 years old, and these would still have difficulty in reading fluently and with complete understanding. At the other end of the classroom would be my top group, consisting of 3 children, including Kathy Waits, who would be taking the examination which would decide their future schooling at 11. These children would need particular care in being shown how to tackle arithmetical problems, how to understand written questions, and, more important still, how to set out their answers and express themselves generally in clear and straightforward language. Miss Clare's youngest group would consist of the 2 new little boys, Jimmy Waits and Joseph Coggs, as well as the twins, Diana and Helen, who had entered late last term owing to measles and had learnt very little. Miss Clare was of the opinion, knowing some of their family history, that they might well be in her bottom group for years. "What can you expect?" she said, looking at the hieroglyphics that passed for writing on their blackboards. "Their grandfather never stuck at one job for more than a week, and the boy took after him. Added to that, he married a girl with as much sense as himself, and these 2 are the result." "I'll get the doctor to look at them specially when she comes," I comforted. "I think if they had their adenoids removed, they might be much brighter." Miss Clare's snort showed what good she thought this would do 2 of the biggest duffers who had ever come into her hands. Her aim with the top group in her class will be, first, to see that they can read and also write legibly, know their multiplication tables up to 6 times at least, and be able to do the 4 rules of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, working with tens and units and shillings and pence. They should also have a working knowledge of the simple forms of money, weight, and length, and be able to tell the time. John, who had had his gaze fixed on the ancient wall clock, now gave 6 gigantic tugs of the rope, for it said 5 minutes to 9, and then, leaping up onto the corner desk, looped it up out of Temptation's way onto a hook high in the wall. Outside, we could hear the scuffle of feet and cries of excited children. Together, Miss Clare and I walked out into the sunshine to meet our classes. And we'll work our way further into the year next time.